Next presenter, Dennis Todey, he is the director of the USDA Midwest Climate Hub, has some experience in South Dakota as well, and he will be talking about climate whiplash, drought, flood, drought, water and agricultural impacts from 2018 to 2020. So with that, Dennis, I will let you take it away.
Good morning, everybody. And yes, I have some experience with some of you. And for those of you who remember me, I apologize. You have to hear me again, but it's good to be back again. Let's see, trying to make sure we got things set up here. One, can you hear me? Make sure you can hear me okay.
Coming through loud and clear.
Okay, and let's see. All right, which are you seeing on the way of slides?
And it is the correct view.
The correct view. Excellent. Okay. Good morning, everybody. It's nice to be back with some of you again, talking about some of the things in the Northern Plains. I'm a Midwestern guy originally. I spent a lot of time in South Dakota talking about plains issues, so it's good to be back and talking about some of those issues also. We're going to talk a little bit today about some of the issues over the last several years and the water and agricultural impacts from them, because we've just had a few issues with water and agriculture over the last few years related to some bouncing back and forth. And there's some new research I'm going to end with, not my own, but a colleague of ours, a state climatologist in Illinois, is in review right now talking about some of the variability issues. You can also blame me. We've had a couple presentations now talking about dams and dam breakage. I guess you could say it's my fault that these dams broke. Because of the water issues that we've had going on recently, because there were big weather climate events that were drivers related to some of this. And so we're going to talk about some of those as we go along here. So what we're going to do, I'm going to give you a quick background on the climate hubs for your information, for those of you who may not be familiar with us. Then we'll get the guts of the presentation, and then we'll give you a few more resources about the Midwest Climate Hub and some contact information. I am breaking borders here, talking to South Dakota, because you technically are not part of our hub area. The Midwest Hub is housed in Ames. I'm sitting on the lovely campus of Iowa State University here. We are teleworking, but I do come into work for things like this because frankly, you have better internet. That's one thing I miss from South Dakota. I had better internet in South Dakota than I do in Ames. Imagine that. So, but we are crossing borders here because South Dakota does fit into the Northern Plains Climate Hub, the 6-state region that is based out of Fort Collins. Danelle Peck is the director out there, but we cross borders back and forth because of the various issues related to climate and agriculture across the region. Let me pause here. One more thing. As an old extension guy, I do like interaction. It's a little more difficult in this type of structure. But if you do have questions along the way, I'm going to try to keep an eye open for questions here, or John can flag me down. If there's any questions or comments you want to make along the way, go ahead and shoot them out. We'll address them as we go along. So a little bit more, our 8-state region is most of the bulk of the Corn Belt from Minnesota, Missouri over to Michigan and Ohio. And then the Northern Plains is off to our west there. We are a little bit different. We share our region with the Northern Forest Hub. They sit in the Forest Service, so they deal with the forestry issues. So they're a bit more focused further north in our region, the more heavily forested areas. We cover the rest of agricultural issues in our region. There are 10 hubs nationally. 5 sit in the Forest Service, 5 sit in the Ag Research Service, which is the part where we sit. We deal, I reference the Corn Belt to give people a concept of where we are, but we deal with a wide variety of crops. And yes, we do grow things besides corn and beans in our region. In fact, how many of you like your pumpkin pie at Thanksgiving? Raise your hand if you like your pumpkin pie at Thanksgiving. More than likely, that pumpkin came from our region. 85, I think the number is 85% of the canned pumpkin in the country comes from one area in central Illinois. Around the Peoria, Morton, Illinois area, there's a huge amount of the pumpkin that is grown, actually a squash, for canned pumpkin comes from that region. I've been assured this year that there is plenty of canned pumpkin, so we're good to go. A few years ago, that was not an issue. That's how I found out this was a big area. But there are also lots of horticultural, especially as you go further north in our region, up in the Great Lakes, a lot more horticultural regions, which have a different whole set of weather and climate issues, which we don't have enough time to talk about today. We are quite small. We don't have a large, in fact, I'm the only staff member existing right now. There are two previous ones have left for other positions. We're working on filling them. In fact, if you are interested in being a coordinator for the Midwest Climate Hub, the ad just came out today. So if you're interested in coming to lovely Ames, Iowa, it's a great place, and join to be part of us, contact me because we're going to be hiring a position. It's only going to be open for about 10 days. To that end, we work a lot with partners. South Dakota State University and land grants are strong partners of all of our climate hubs. We work with other federal partners all across the board, better to serve our stakeholders in our region because of this. So let's get on to talk about what we're addressing here. I'll pause here if there's any questions, and I don't see any questions. John, I don't think we've got anything coming so far yet. So looks like we're still good. Again, if you got to chime in along the way, if you get to see them. So anyway, talking about major climate issues that are impacting what's going on around right now. Specifically, I want to point out, we're going to show you a couple of these. These are billion-dollar weather and climate disasters. NOAA tracks these, has been tracking them for 40 years now. Billion-dollar weather and climate disasters, where they are and what they are. And we've talked about the March storm last year. It was, and the flooding that was associated with it. We'll show you a little more information on that in a little bit. But it was one of those billion-dollar weather and climate disasters, one of several that occurred throughout the central U.S. Last year. If we jump ahead to this year, by golly, we've had a bunch more. The only one that has so far included South Dakota was the derecho, the August 10th derecho that passed right over Ames, and we got the better end of it, I can tell you that. But it did start in southeast South Dakota. There was a little bit of damage in southeast South Dakota and northeast Nebraska before it really brought the most of its damage across central Iowa. But the graph down here really gives you an idea of what's happening. This is not national, but we've zoomed up in, if you go to this website, showing billion-dollar disasters and what they are and how many there are. This is zoomed in on NOAA calls it their west north central climate region. Yeah, okay, that confuses issues a little bit. Basically, the states of the Dakotas, Wyoming, Nebraska, and Montana. And the number of events is on the left-hand side, and the cost in billions is on the right-hand side, indicating most of our bigger events have been severe storms through this time period. Some have been wildfires. Droughts are the brown ones along here. We're going to talk a lot about water here, but a bigger issue, another issue is drought. We continue to have drought throughout our region. So again, talking about excess precipitation. This is a graphic from the last National Climate Assessment. Won't spend too much time on it. South Dakota and the upper Midwest, this graph or the map here at the top, greater than 15% increase in precipitation over the last century. So it stands to reason why we're having more water issues. We're getting more water throughout the year. We'll talk more about that here in a second. Not only in the Dakotas, but all across the upper Midwest, causing additional issues. We are, in South Dakota, it's interesting because just off to the west, as you get over into Wyoming, the trend's a little different. It's actually getting drier over the last 100 years, whereas most of the upper Midwest is getting wetter. Okay, now I'm going to break down the change.
Might have lost you, Dennis.
Are we back yet?
Yep, you're back.
Okay, how much did you lose me there?
Change, I think was the last word.
Change, okay. Change is good. How ironic is that? You come from home to a USDA facility for better internet and your internet glitches. Imagine that. Okay. Graphics here are for South Dakota, averaged over the state of South Dakota. The x-axis in all of them is the same. It's 1895 on the left to 2020 on the right. And then these are the 4 seasons. These are the 4 climatological seasons. December through February, winter in the upper left. March through May, spring in the upper right, June through August, summer in the lower left, and fall, September through November on the lower right. And then each of the points is a year. The red line is a running average, and then the blue line is a trend. So it shows really kind of what's going on in the way of some of our changes. We know that our climate is extremely variable in this region. We've known that. It's a hallmark of what South Dakota is, but showing you the bigger changes over time, really showing up in the spring and fall, okay? More precipitation in the spring and fall. Agricultural field, and in the fall, you're trying to get in and out of the field harvesting. But also, it's interesting, we've seen a more recent trend here in the winter. Increases in winter total precipitation, kind of interestingly, and somewhat in the summer, but not quite as much of that. The spring also presents problems from a water standpoint. Typically, your soils are wetter, potentially frozen, and putting more precipitation on top of that adds to our overall water issues, which we've seen several times. That was one of the problems we had last year with the runoff, with the March event, was that we had frozen soils we were falling on. And in fact, the last 24-month period ending at the end of December 2019 was the wettest 2-year period, the wettest 24-month period in South Dakota by a landslide. So these are 2-month periods ending 2019. Here's where you are in 2019 compared to the rest of them. The 18-19 totals were 54.65 inches average statewide. That's 54 inches averaged over the state for that 2-year period. That blew away the next records. The next records were all in the 48s in 1914-15, 15-16, 1905, 1906, and 95-96, another impressive couple-year period. So that shows you why we had some of the issues that South Dakota had in that region. And it wasn't only South Dakota that had this. Minnesota said a same thing, 24-month period on record. Okay, let's jump ahead to pick up some more things here. Okay, a little more perspective, going back to 2018. And in the way of drought, we got to go back to 2018 because I'm going to show you a graphic here later on, some of the changes in drought. But we're going to show you some of that variability issue that we talked about already. So these are rankings for the calendar year, January through December, temperature on the upper left-hand side, precipitation on the lower right-hand side. So areas that are towards the blue side are cooler, that are toward the red side are warmer, and things that are darker green are wetter, things that are darker brown are drier. So 2018, actually South Dakota and some associated states were on the cool side overall for that calendar year. And 108th out of 124 years. So we were on the wet side. We talked about this a little bit already. You jump ahead to 2019. Actually, and this is slightly different. The temperature one is not average temperatures, it's average high temperatures. So South Dakota for 2019 was the second coolest for average highs on record. Along with that, wettest year on record, as we've talked about. So cool and wet, particularly cool and wet in 2019. And then we jump ahead to 2020, and then we've done our flip-flop again. South Dakota so far in 2020 is the 20th driest on record, and 102 out of 126 years from warm. So we flipped again, part of one of our ongoing flip-flop issues in our region. So review a couple things about 2019, just going back. The big March storm was what really helped to kick things off. Part of the reason the March storm was quite large, but previous to that, the winter of 2018-19, the big numbers are the ranks of how snowiest that year was, 2018-19, and then the upper right is the total number of inches. So we had some record snowfalls in 2018-19, and then we had the big March storm event that the total precipitation was not astounding for a March event, but it was fairly wet, but it fell on top of frozen ground, frozen wet ground, and on top of snow. So that was what really kicked off. And then you had ice along with that, which is why we had the seriousness of that March event overall. But it didn't end there. It kept going until fall. Here's fall average stream flows. This is I took from another presentation I did or last fall. This is October, and we had still record high stream flows going on in October. This wetness continued throughout the year. And in fact, I was trying to find those numbers, but I wasn't able to come up with them quickly. Parts of southeast South Dakota set all time, not just for that time of year, but all time record flows in the fall of 2019 because of the rain going on. Here's an image of some of those that was taken from another presentation last fall that continued record flooding. This kept going on. This is Plattsmouth down in Nebraska, Baltic, South Dakota flooding, and some other issues. Okay, so lots of water, lots of flooding throughout the year. The agricultural issues were all astounding last year. There were incredible delays, record delays. These are graphics from the USDA Office of the Chief Economist, a colleague of ours, Brad Rippey. Unfortunately, they're not generally available, but he shares them with us. This is late May. This is late May, almost, this is like Memorial Day last year. And the percent of corn planted on the top and how that compares to average, and then the soybeans on the lower right-hand side. By late May, 25% of the corn in South Dakota had been planted. That was 65% behind average. And it wasn't only, South Dakota was kind of ground zero, but it was all across the upper Midwest. Soybeans were similar. Soybeans, only 6% have been planted, 58% behind. So the incredible wetness really delayed and prevented a lot of planting happening last year related to a lot of agricultural issues. And what happens in agriculture when you are late planting, that carries over. Everything matures late because it's really very difficult to catch up through the year. This was late October last year. The issues were a bit larger in North Dakota than they were in South Dakota, but percent of corn mature was 88%, 11% behind. And then soybeans harvested they were 32% behind by late October. This is late October, and you still didn't have soybeans harvested. So, the wetness, slowed crop progress down, slowed the harvesting issues throughout all the year. What that led to, these are crop indemnities paid by USDA's Risk Management Agency. As of November last year, there are a little bit of changes in that from that time period, but the brownest areas are over $10 million in indemnities paid in each of those counties. So you can see eastern North Dakota, eastern South Dakota, southwest Minnesota really were at ground zero for some of the worst issues last year. Down along the Missouri River, other additional flooding problems down into Missouri, parts of northern Illinois, parts of northwestern Ohio. Strangely enough, just a little interesting tidbit, Northwest Ohio had their earliest last freeze. So they were free of freeze conditions last year, but they still couldn't get crop planted because they were so wet during that time period. Some of those amazing kinds of things that are coming out of this. And then that problem even carried over to this year into 2020. This is May of 2020 this year. And the wetness problems carried over from North Dakota, particularly where they still had crops in the ground. They didn't get harvested last year, and wet conditions. So corn was only 12% emerged, 23% behind, and soybeans planted 29%, 31% behind, whereas much of the rest of the Corn Belt was in much better shape because we had carryover water issues we were very concerned about. Things fortunately dried out, which led to other issues this year. Fortunately dried out and allowed crop progress to go on. This is 2020 crop indemnities, and look, some of the same areas, 2 years back to back because of mainly wetness and then some dryness also popping in here in 2020 in some of those same areas. Whereas much of the rest of the Corn Belt generally in pretty good condition, much less crop problems from last year. Now, there's other agricultural issues, not only because of the heavy rainfall, and you talked about some of these already with some of the runoff issues. Part of our problem in agriculture is we have some issues in agriculture, but we also have issues with practices that were established at some point along the way aren't working anymore because they were established for a different climate regime. We're getting more rainfall now, more rainfall at different times of the year. So things that used to work and we could get by with don't work anymore, leading to those heavy rainfalls, lots more soil loss, lots more nutrient loss, because practices that we thought and seem to work at some point don't work now. So that's why a part of what we're trying to do is help encourage agriculture to adapt practices to try to deal with those ongoing issues and release some and to fix some of those problems that are being caused by additional rainfalls. But wetness is not the whole story, okay? We want to go back the other side. Drought is still an issue, not as frequent, but still a definite issue. This is a graphic from the US Drought Monitor, and it shows coverage over the state of South Dakota on the top from the onset of the US Drought Monitor from about 2000 till the present. And on the bottom, we've zoomed that area up from 2011 until the present, giving you a little closer view. And then the percent area that is covered by the various levels of the US Drought Monitor. The drought areas are, and I don't have that on the graphic, I apologize. They go from the yellow is D0, and then the additional colors, the tan is D1, the orangish tan is D2, the red, darker red is D3, and then the deep red is D4. So much of my time there, we spent in the 2000s in that very dry period, the regularly dry period. Then we had a wetter period until 2012, and then major drought in 2012, and then some hit and miss issues since then. But while we've had this very wet period in 2019 and early part of 2020, we can see that 2018 was an overall issue. There was drought leading into this. 2018, we had D2 and D3 covering a decent amount of South Dakota, then overall dry until this year. Then things returned this year as things dried out early, allowed. But then we've had more dryness since then. You can see that a little more closely here at the bottom. Okay. Question: could you touch on the advantage of using calendar year versus water year data? El Nino, La Nina, how minimum temperatures are increasing, no-till farming practices, and local and regional weather and climate events. Gene has just asked for another whole talk. Okay, let me touch on these real quickly here. I think I can cover some of them. Advantage of using calendar year versus water year data. Water year may work better also from a crop standpoint. A lot of people identify with different parts of the calendar year more easily because water year also works well from a soil standpoint, because typically that's the end of the soil growing season, and then you're starting soil moisture recharge and carry over into next year. And that's part of our problem we see in the Dakotas, is these changes in precipitation have led to more wet falls, and that carries over to wetness problems in the springtime. It's as long as you're understanding when the rainfall is, you know, there may not be an advantage of one versus the other. The role of El Nino and La Nina. We're going to see part of this year. El Nino and La Nina are one of several variability parts in the climate system that do have some impact on what happens in large parts of the US and the Dakotas. Each of those interact with each other, and we have to understand all those changes and interactions when we talk about variability. The biggest thing we can understand about El Ninos and La Ninas is about when these happen, we have some idea of changes that will be happening in that coming year. We're likely to be seeing a fairly strong La Nina this winter into next spring, which increases the chances of being colder and potentially wetter later in the winter for your area. If it would carry over, it would increase some chances of drought next year, but it would have to carry over into next growing season. Daily minimum temperature are increasing. Don't have a whole lot of time to talk about that. If we looked at temperature trends, we would see, particularly in the summertime, somewhat throughout the year, but particularly in the summertime, we are warming, but warming by our overnight minimum temperatures. Our overnights are warming faster than our daytime highs are. And a lot of that has to do with the additional rainfall, the additional water in our region. And then the need for no-till farming practices. Definitely we encourage reduced tillage and cover crops because of, when we're talking about this issue, that trying to keep that soil structure, trying to keep whatever is on the soil, nutrients, water, whatever, keep it there. And when it does run off, to eliminate the potential for soil loss and for nutrient loss. Those are all good practices. Unfortunately, there's a lot of variability. There's a lot of reasons people make decisions the way they do in agriculture. And we were trying to work against a lot of those. Okay. So one last thing, I promise you. Okay, I talked about variability. Variability is extremely difficult to deal with. Why? Because you're dealing with big scales of spatial and temporal variability. You've got variability from day to day, weekly, monthly, interannually, from one season to another one. How do you scale that up? And then also variability in space. You've got, because it's not only is it raining here, but is it raining 10 miles over there? And is that changing? Or 20 miles over there, or 30 miles, or whatever. So definitely the speeding up of the hydrologic cycle has been addressed as a climate change issue, and we are seeing that and expecting to see that. But I mentioned a colleague, the state climatologist in Illinois, is leading a paper showing basically this, a quick explanation is the graphics on the bottom are 30 days, 90 days, and 180 days within a year of shifts between wet and dry or dry to wet using what's called the SPI, the Standardized Precipitation Index. So that if we look at within the 30-day period, the variability is pretty much the same all across the Eastern Dakotas and Midwest. As we look at 90 days, you see the northern areas tend to stand out more, and especially at 180 days, the Eastern Dakotas and Minnesota, there's more big shifts happen within a year. And that seems to be a hallmark of our climate, which we know, we mentioned already. But he notes that looking over this period 51 to 2019, it's not changing significantly. That's still the same as it has been over that time period. I think if we went back and looked previously, we would probably see, if it took a longer period, we might see more about that. But we're waiting for this paper to come out, and we can talk more about that at this point. A couple last things real quick. If you like hearing more about weather climate updates, the third Thursday of every month, we do a drought and climate outlook webinar. We've been doing these since we started. Actually, the 2011 flood along the Missouri River was the impetus for these. We started doing them as a follow-up to that 2011 one because La Nina was a partial driver of that, and we were concerned about 2012 being a follow-up to that, and we've just kept doing them ever since then. So they're free. You just have to sign up for them. If you go to those at the top, the links at the top, that can get you linked for them. They're free. Anyone can ask questions. They are recorded, and you can see them afterwards. Just another quick link on some climate indicators. If you're more interested about what's happening in agriculture and issues of climate change impacting agriculture, this is a newly released USDA document talking about a wide range of climate change indicators in agriculture. It's very readable. It's written for an extension outreach type audience. So go ahead and give it a check out. And then just a couple other more about the Midwest Climate Hub and our website. You can just go there or Google us and find us, and some of our outreach products. We'll jump through because I'm running low on time here. And where you can find us, my email and phone information, also social media if you want to join us. So this used to be the staff of the Climate Hub. Now we're just down to one of us. Soon we hope to be back full staff again. So I think I've used up all my time, unfortunately, but I don't know, John, if there's time for one or two quick questions.
Yeah, if anyone has a quick question, they can throw that in the Q&A. And thanks, that was a lot of information. Can you put those links in the chat? You can work on that after you finish presenting. And so we can also include those.
Which links are you referring to? I had links to just about everything in there is freely available except for the USDA maps. Do you want all the links, or is just certain ones of those?
Good question. Not sure. Probably the resources links would be my guess. And we will have the presentations video as well as the slide deck on the website after the conference. So monthly webinar links.
Will do. Will do.
Great. All right. Well, thanks so much.
Appreciate it.
Man, that was great. It's not great actually, but because it's really challenging climate and weather and things to deal with, but it is good that we have good folks like you working on these issues, and we can continue to make sense of them.